What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Stacking the Box. I'm your host, Reed Wallach, back from my 1 week hiatus to Citi Field to go watch the Mets playoff game. Joined, as always, by my co-host, Cody Williams. A lot to get to from last week and a lot to get to for this week. A lot going on. Busy time of year, Cody. I think we now have to promise to each other we're in it now. This is it. No more time off. This is it. It's gut punch time for all these teams in college football. We got to also rise to the occasion here as we get into the depths of conference play. So how you doing, man? How was last week?
Doing good, man. And I can promise you vacations are over until probably post Super Bowl for me, if I'm being honest. Like we've got a long road ahead, so had to take a little recharge there. But doing good, man. It was a hectic weekend of college football, to say the least.
I thought going into last week that the slate lost a little bit of luster. Like overall, Oregon, Ohio State was still big, but I still thought some of the games, just given the other results, have lost a little bit of shine. But the product delivered in a big way on Saturday. That was an epic slate of games, really from start to finish. You want to talk before Saturday with like the Friday night game with Arizona State, Utah being a great watch, all the way through into the late night game with Colorado, Kansas State, finishing. I'm on the East Coast. That finished after 2 a.m. So it was really an epic slate of games, and there's another one on deck for this week. So we are really being spoiled here as college football fans.
No, and I think one lesson to any college football fan out there watching, there's just nothing but loaded slates from here on out. Like you look at the schedule ahead, and there's no apple picking weekend on Saturday waiting for us. It's all loaded from here. But I mean, as true college football fans, that gets me more excited than it does have me, dreading the workload that's going to come with it.
Yeah, and I think my big macro takeaway, and I think what we're going to get into when we preview some of the games, and we're going to talk about right now with a little contender pretender, is something I kind of alluded to after Georgia, Alabama. It just feels like a lot of these teams are closer than they've ever been before, and there lacks LSU, a Joe Burrow team, or a Georgia 2 years ago when they ended up beating TCU in the national championship, when they were like the clear class of football. It just feels like there really are a lot of really good teams, and there's not a truly we are separate from the pack. Everyone's chasing us. It feels like everyone's all clumped together, and we're just kind of sifting through it with more data points as we go on throughout the season.
No, absolutely. And I think, honestly, weirdly enough, one of the best ways to see that is if you look at FPI from ESPN, and I believe it was Bud Elliott of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports that brought this to my attention. But he said that I believe it was 4 years ago, the lowest team in the FPI was like minus 25 or something like that, and now it's like minus 14. So that's like a huge change in just the bottom part of college football. But if you calculate that all the way throughout, you're going to get a much more like condensed version of where these teams are when they stack up to one another. So I think you're absolutely right. I personally think there's one team that is separating itself a little bit. Looking at our sheet, I think you may disagree. So we'll see what happens there. But I do think that like there are some teams that maybe do have a slight edge, but I don't think it's as obvious as it has been in years past, for sure.
Yeah, little teaser ahead to our pick segment. But let's talk some of these other teams. Some contender, pretender, especially. It's both a good way to preview the upcoming week, but also talk about what happened last week. And I think a good place to start is Alabama. It's now 2 weeks in a row that the Tide have either lost or should have lost.
Right.
If South Carolina had some competent quarterback play off that win against Georgia, where everyone anointed them, maybe there's a little bit more of a mirage that this team has some fundamental issues with the entire roster, both on offense and defense. Cody, I'll give you first word. Is Alabama a contender or pretender?
This is honestly the toughest one for me to like designate which way to go on this.
Well, wait, I think are we saying like national, like championship contender or playoff contender?
I would say like kind of somewhere in the middle, like win a playoff game.
Okay, got it. I just let's set the ground rules here before we get into this. So Alabama, win a playoff game contender, pretender. Okay, I'm good.
I think, with the parameters of winning a playoff game, I think Alabama is a contender. But where that gets tricky is I think that of these teams that are in the playoff mix right now, I think Alabama might have the highest variance because I don't think this defense is as good as we saw under Saban. I think Womack and Linguist have not exactly provided an upgrade there in addition to the talent losses they had on that side of the ball. And then for as much improvement as we can see from Jalen Miller at times, like we saw in the Georgia game, he's still not a perfect player. He's still not a top 5 draft pick coming. Like he still has some deficiencies as a quarterback. You still have to rely on his legs probably more than you would like to if you're Kalen DeBoer. So like, I think that adds to a lot of variance. And I think that's why we've seen the results we have the past 2 weeks because, South Carolina, like you mentioned, if Lenore Sellers was A, 100% healthy, and B, maybe a little bit more competent a passer, Alabama's lost 2 straight. But they went up against a good South Carolina defense, and the offense only put up 27 points. Then on the defensive side of the ball, Vanderbilt didn't have anything fluky really happen for them. They just went out there and beat them. So, like, I do think that Alabama just has a lot of variance. But I do think the high end of that variance says they can absolutely win a playoff game. They could probably even win 2 and get to a semifinal.
I'm going to go with pretender.
Okay.
I thought they were a pretender before the season, so getting these kind of results now is going to justify my expectations. So I'll stay on the anti-Tide bandwagon. Are they going to make the playoff? Probably, I'd say, but to me, and again, obviously, we're going to talk like if they get like a really good matchup or something. Of course, they can win a playoff game, but just on. To me, I don't think this is a national championship contender. I thought full credit to Kalen DeBoer getting that game plan in place to really blitz Georgia from the start. But Georgia came back and took the lead in that game despite Alabama trouncing them for the first 30 minutes. So I think that's more game plan dependent more than anything. And I think what you're seeing these last 2 weeks is more of what I expected where, yeah, this team has some issues in the back end where it's a bunch of freshmen in the secondary and they lose 3 NFL caliber players. 3 NFL draft picks, I should say, from their team last year, the team that went to the college football playoff. Jalen Milroe's great, Ryan Williams is great, but the running game isn't really there outside of Milroe design runs. You go back to that Georgia game, non-Milroe ball carriers, or running backs, I should say, 11 carries for 45 yards. So it's not like this team, it's really built around Milroe creating late off script and the deep passes, which it worked last year, but they had a better defense last year. So I don't know if it's going to work this year.
No, I'm with you. I mean, in the South Carolina game, I believe between Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, the longest rush that they had was 8 yards between the two of them. And I mean, credit to South Carolina's defense, which I do think is a good unit, but yeah, you're Alabama. That should not be what you're looking at when you look at the numbers. And I do think that another thing that you mentioned was that first half, the game plan against Georgia and how they came out and they blitzed them. Particularly, again, another tease for one of the games we're going to talk about today, but I do wonder if they have those bullets left in the chamber or if the clip is empty. Like, is there something else that they can drop game plan wise that they have, or was that their best shot? And then they don't have a counterpunch if someone is able to answer that.
Another team that is off a big result last week, close call against USC, but Penn State comes from behind, wins in overtime, 33-30 out west against USC. I'll go first this time. I think Penn State's a contender. I think Penn State's legit. I think there are some pitfalls with this team, and I think, again, there are flaws with all these teams, we said, but I think Penn State, though, has an ability with Andy Kotelnicki. We saw them fall behind, and there were some really sound, whether it's trick plays, whether it's getting the ball down the field. Drew Aller, I think this season has made some serious strides. Now, look, he had 2 picks against USC, 2 really bad ones at that, but I think the arm talent's pretty obvious with this guy. Like, I can see why NFL teams will gravitate towards Drew Aller when the draft comes around because the arm talent is pretty special. Mm-hmm. I think the talent on hand on offense, they probably lack a real receiving threat. Tyler Warren, sure, tight end, but they lack a real one in terms of receiver. But with Singleton, Katron Allen, and Drew Aller, and a really good offense coordinator, I think you can make it work, especially with a defensive line that can wreak havoc like Penn State's can. So I actually left the game pretty impressed with Penn State because they fell behind pretty quickly in that one. Had some bad, whether it's a penalty on 4th down at the 1 against USC, like some things didn't go their way. but they ended up opening up the playbook, which I think was a big concern about them. And they showed that they're good enough to withstand a few bad breaks along the way and still get a win. So I think Penn State's legit, and they host Ohio State. Is that next week? Few weeks?
2 weeks. 2 weeks. Yep.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure that one's going to make the rundown that week.
I think it might.
Right now, I feel a certain type of way about that game.
Yeah, I posited 2 weeks ago on another podcast that Penn State might be the best team in the Big Ten, and I'm not ready to go off of that statement just yet. I'm with you. I think they are a contender. I think the point you made about Drew Aller is obvious. Like, I think it's obvious for anyone watching, but I also think just narrative wise, you look at how that USC game played out in comparison to what we saw from Drew Aller last year, and Drew Aller throws 2 picks early in the game and falls behind. He's not leading them back last year with the quarterback he was. And he really tightened up and ran code. And, credit to Andy Kotelnicki. I think he absolutely helped that cause. But I do think that on top of that, like, Drew Aller showed a lot of maturity and showed a lot of progression in who he is as a quarterback and a leader and a player on that offense. So I think that, on top of everything else you mentioned, does make them a contender. On top of that, you think of the James Franklin narrative, one of my fan-sided coworkers, John Bueller, we have a joke. We call it the James Franklin driving school because you're going 10-2, baby. And so, but I do think he is graduating from that because of the coordinator hires that he's made, because of how talented this team is. I do think that that's a game that Penn State has lost many times before. Even if they do come back, they still don't, they don't close it out. The fact that they closed it out, they won a game that, frankly, they probably should have lost. That tells me a lot about the makeup of this Penn State team. And so I don't come out of there having any type of negative feelings about them. I think that getting that win was crucial for them.
Yeah, and I just think a defensive line like that is something you could really lean on come the bigger games on their schedule. So we're gonna talk now a few teams that are in some big games this weekend. So maybe it'll be a little hint towards where we're leaning with our pick side. With Georgia. So since the Bama game, little out of sight, out of mind. They did get into a shootout with Mississippi State, which may be a questionable look given the state of Mississippi State. But Cody, where do you land right now with the Bulldogs? Is their toughest? Well, I mean, the Clemson win, I guess, is aging pretty well. Yeah. Now that Clemson's running it up on every team. But where do you stand with Georgia ahead of another big test in what is going to be a lot more big test than SEC play for the Dogs?
I still think they're a contender. That's not with my full heart, full confidence behind that, but I still think they are a contender. I think the talent level is just too much to ignore. What really worries me about Georgia at this point is Mike Bobo. I think that we know what Mike Bobo is, and so does every defensive coordinator in the SEC at this point. So, I think that's a problem. I think that this team has looked better when they're forced to run with tempo. I think that's when the offense has looked at its best. But I do think that we've seen some, I don't want to call them cracks in the secondary and on the defense, particularly up front, but I just don't think we have the game changers that we've had in those areas previously on Georgia. Malachi Starks, maybe, but that's just one guy. We don't have the full unit that's going to be able to shut down an opposing team. So I do think Georgia is going to be able to win on talent alone in most of the games that they play, particularly if they're in a 7-8 or a 7-10 matchup or something like that in the playoff. I still think Georgia would come out on top of that. So if we're talking about contender, meaning winning a playoff game, I do still think they're fully capable of that. I'm less high on their national championship hopes, I think, is where I would come down on that.
Yeah, I think Georgia's definitely still a contender. I think no doubt. You look at a few bounces go a different way against Alabama. They win that game pretty clearly. I know maybe Alabama doesn't look so good and it's a loss or whatever, but everyone's losing games this season. I don't think to be a contender, you don't need to be undefeated in this new world. You can lose 2 games and still be a contender. So I think Georgia, absolutely. I am still a Carson Beck believer. Now, maybe Mike Bobo holds him back a little bit with his play calling, but this is still, as producer Joanne says, hashtag in Kirby we trust. I completely agree. This was the best team in the country going into the season. And I think given where we're at with the other teams that are viewed as national championship contenders, there's enough holes to poke in every team that I think it's almost like the group hasn't changed all that much. Maybe you have to reorder a little bit, but that small group is still the small group. And Georgia's part of that. Georgia's probably at the center of it. So Yeah, I think Georgia's definitely still a contender. Another team that suffered a loss, maybe in more shocking fashion than Georgia, was Tennessee 2 weeks ago to Arkansas. We have not spoken since that game, Cody. As you know, I'm a big Tennessee guy. Rocky Top let me down pretty bad in that one. Do you think Tennessee is a contender or pretender?
I'm leaning pretender with this one. And I think that it shocked this. I mean, what I'm about to say does not feel like a statement I ever expected to make about Tennessee, but it's because of the offense, man. This offense I think that honestly, I see a potential Drew Aller type of upgrade, but potentially with even more talent with Nico. But I just think that what we've seen from Nico at this point, it was a point Josh Yorish actually brought up on the show last week. He's really struggled to take what's there from this offense. And part of that is also the receiving core. I don't think the receiving core, I think they miss having a Jalen Hyatt type of presence who can take the top off of defense. Squirrel White, I don't know if he's injured or playing hurt or something, but he's not been the player that we saw last year in flashes. So this offense just looks like it has a gear out of place right now. The defense is still one of the best in the country. I fully believe in that defense. And if the offense were to get right, then I would change my tune completely here. But if Tennessee does not have the offense with the pace that we know they're going to play at, that's going to clip them at some point. And like, I'm worried based on what I've seen to this point, it's looking like they might not even make the college football playoff.
Yeah, it sucks. This was my team. This was my team. It looks so good. Yeah, Tennessee. We're gonna talk that Alabama-Tennessee game. A game I was very interested in 2 weeks ago. I am no longer very interested in it. I'm more from like an excitement level. I'm more interested to learn about which team is kind of heading down the we're done side of things, and the other team that's like, oh well, maybe we just jump started the second half of our season. What really stands out to me, like you mentioned, is Nico Iamaleava. Less than 10 yards, completing 87% of his passes. So when it's there for him, he's actually crushing it. When it's like nice and easy, spread the field out, nice, easy in the boundary. When it's more than 10 yards down the field, he's completing 30% of his passes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not connecting. The deep ball isn't there for Tennessee whatsoever. So it's gonna be a little tough for me to see that. Now look, if the passing game starts connecting, then all of a sudden Tennessee can do that, can get back into this thing in terms of playoff. I still don't know if they can necessarily really win a playoff game. Mm-hmm. We'll see. And the offensive line, some injuries starting to bubble up there. You mentioned the passing game or pass catching group isn't really there. It's tough scenes for me with my Tennessee love. So Rocky Top, I don't know if it's their year this year. I was maybe I put the cart before the horse before that one. Another team, or you have another thought on Tennessee?
I was just going to say, of all these teams that we're talking about with contenders and pretenders, like I do think that Tennessee is the most likely to be able to change their status at this point for me. Does that make sense? Like I think the path for them to change is so obvious, and like we're not talking about a talent deficiency, maybe in the pass catching core, but in terms of Nico, in terms of this offensive line, like it's getting healthy and getting a quarterback more mature, like to mature a little bit, essentially, is all we're asking for, which it's an offense that can be played on easy mode and can help a quarterback develop quicker than you might expect. So like, I do think the path for them, like changing their stock in terms of contender pretender, is the easiest for any of these any of the teams that we're going to talk about in this segment.
Yeah. And again, we could come back here next Tuesday at 1:00 Eastern, and we could be talking about Tennessee like, wow, like Nico, what a performance, really got Tennessee, like put him on their back and completely changed the trajectory of their season. So it's definitely in the cards. But again, to me, like that Alabama-Tennessee game, that is like a loser leaves town type of matchup to take from the WWE. Like it feels like that's like that one has like, there's stakes in all the games, obviously, but that one feels like it's like really like, you got to get that one or else you're really running out of avenues to really be contending for the college football playoff. Last team, LSU. Thrilling comeback win against Ole Miss. As someone who bet LSU, that was a very, very long, real-time long. Also was very stressful long in terms of both teams just squandering chances left and right and crazy plays. But Garrett Nussmeier gets it done, beats Ole Miss, potentially acts as Ole Miss's chances of making the college football playoff. LSU now all of a sudden back in the mix. They're a small road favorite at Arkansas. Where do you see LSU in the grand scheme of things, Cody?
I think, and maybe I'm way off base here, but I think this might be a contender because we've seen this offensive line early in the year when they, when they looked lesser than, they were struggling a little bit. I think this offensive line has improved. I think they're being better coached. Weirdly enough, I think this defense, the improvements that we expected to see under Blake Baker, I think we're seeing them without Harold Perkins on the field, which is a weird thing to say considering he's probably the most talented defender that team has. But I think the defense has improved since he's exited the lineup. So I'm weirdly on top of this. I think Garrett Nussmeier might be like a top 5 quarterback in college football this year. Like I think he doesn't have the mobility, obviously, but in terms of, you outlook for pro passers, he's up there for me. I think he's an absolute stud, and I think that he's proving that week by week. So I think that LSU absolutely has a chance to, obviously, after the Ole Miss win, make the playoff, but on top of that, win a playoff game because there aren't many defenses that are going to be able to slow down this offense. And if this defense does continue to improve as they, I think, frankly, have just a better scheme fit all around for what they're looking for, I think that LSU has the potential to win a playoff game.
I'm going to disagree with you. I think LSU is a pretender. I think they just got a really good setup there against Ole Miss. Ole Miss playing their 7th straight game, LSU off a bye. They get it done. I love Nussmeier, but you saw the running game like non-existent. To me, like this LSU team chucking it 50 times, they're just going to get tripped up. And you look at the rest of their schedule, you're at Arkansas, you're only a 2.5-point favorite. Then you're at A&M. I think they're going down there. They're going to be a dog in that one. You're home Alabama. We'll see you're home, I guess. And then, after that, you have like a pretty decent close at Florida, Vandy, Oklahoma. Maybe watch out for Vandy, but I agree with you.
The doors.
I think the defense has improved. I don't think this team they're not a top 10 team in my opinion. They had a really good setup for this Ole Miss game. I can't unsee the South Carolina effort in what was like a chaotic game. Like they're still, I don't think this team is necessarily improving to the point. I agree with you about the defense maybe taking a step forward. But again, I just think a lot of that had to do with some of the external factors driving that game. To me, LSU's lack of a true run game is going to be what ends up costing them because they're going to run into a team with a good secondary and they're going to be in some trouble, in my opinion, at least.
Let me just a rebuttal. Who's the team on the schedule you just mentioned that's going to clip them with a good secondary? Actually, let me rephrase that. Who are the 2 teams with good secondaries that are going to trip them up to keep them out of the playoff? Because I think if they go 10-2 with the schedule that they have, they're probably in the playoff. So you would need 2 more losses for them to miss the playoff, in my opinion.
SEC title game, we're assuming they get in, right? Because they'd be undefeated, 1 loss in SEC play. That's probably going to get you in.
That's maybe fair. That's a good point. Okay, so
that's gonna be a fun debate of like if you make the conference title game, do you want to? Because then you risk getting a 3rd loss and losing. I think that's an interesting one. But I agree with you about maybe nobody has a secondary, but I think in the SEC, like even Arkansas's defensive line, Texas A&M's defensive line, Bama's defensive line, Oklahoma's defensive line, I do think those defensive lines can wreak enough havoc where if you can't run the ball and it's just Nussmeier chucking it around so much, you become too one-dimensional that if you don't have a good enough secondary, you can game plan around, you know what I mean? Like you could put more resources towards protecting your weaker secondary, that your secondary becomes a little bit better, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And like, to be clear, I'm not championing LSU as a team that's going to be a dark horse national.
It was an impressive win, no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah,
I'm talking just big picture. I'm not buying them or anything like that.
One thing I am trying to get better about as an analyst is taking some preconceived notions and these are 19 to 22-year-old kids, like giving them room to grow, giving them room to improve. And I think LSU might either make or break me in my exercise in this year.
I think Nussmeier is like an NFL level quarterback. He's good. It's just, I don't think if this team's going to become like a pseudo air raid team, I just don't know if that's going to work in the SEC. I think the talent is too high to offset that. And again, like you're basically a coin toss at Arkansas this week. So are you like, this could all stop right there?
Yeah, it absolutely could. And I mean, Arkansas has been a thorn in the side for a lot of teams already this season. So
Yeah. Arkansas's got a good trench play. So I think that's an interesting one as we look ahead to week 8. Speaking of week 8, before we do our pick segment where I'm trying to run down Cody after spotting him a handful of wins, let me tell you about our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. It's the greatest time of year. Again, football is back and it's here to stay until February. Over 1 million fans across 33 states got in the game last year by making picks on Underdog. I use Underdog. Cody uses Underdog. Producer Joanne might be using Underdog. I love their Pick 6 feature where you could go higher or lower on different college football player props. I'm eyeing Carson Beck this weekend against Texas. We're going to preview that game. But looking at the early markets, anywhere in the high 200s, going to look like a play for me on Carson Beck more than passing yards. Higher than passing yards. Make your picks on Underdog. It's straightforward and signing up is even easier. Just head on over to Underdog's simple to use mobile app or underdogfantasy.com. Sign up with the promo code Stack in the Box, the name of this fine program. And Underdog will give you a free pick to use on the first cash pick'em entry plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash. And when you deposit, that's Underdog Fantasy. Promo code, again, is Stacking the Box, one word, all caps, to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. NY, call a 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY, or text HOPE-NY 462-467-369. Again, sign up for Underdog Fantasy today using the promo code Stacking the Box. All right, Cody, week 8 time. We got some big ones here. We got heavy hitters. We're bringing out all the stops. So I'm not sure what you did last week, but in my week off, I was able to console. And it seems like I didn't lose. I had because you missed
gained a little bit of ground. I went 2-4.
Okay, so what do I got here? I'm 14-20. You're 17-18. So I owe a game. I got the half game tiebreaker here. So what am I? 2.5 back?
Yeah.
Okay. I could do this. Pretty ugly so far from us, but I think last year we really did. Both of us hit our strides towards the end of the year. I know bowl season we both cleaned up, but I got some work to do. You're hanging around. I got work to do. So let's start here. Before we get to Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, Nebraska, Indiana, and some of our signature picks, there are 11 games on the weeknight card. Where are you going with your pick?
I'm going to Durham, North Carolina, where the Florida State Seminoles are in action again. Brock Glenn is now the quarterback. I could not care less because Duke's winning this game. I'm taking Duke minus 3.5 in this game. Honestly, didn't think this is a place I'd be in as a North Carolina fan. I'm not happy to be saying any of this, but Duke is under Manny Diaz has continued what Mike Elko started, and they're a defensive-minded football team. They're going to slow it down. They're not going to play with pace or anything like that. They're 36th in overall defensive success rate. FSU's offense is 119th in offensive success rate. I don't think the change to Brock Glenn is going to change it that much, especially with his inexperience and an experienced defensive mind like Manny Diaz. I think he's going to put his mind into a blender. On the flip side, the Blue Devils offense with Malik Murphy is not a world beater by any stretch, but they are average pretty much across the board. Like, I think they're a fine blocking unit. I think they'll be able to handle and keep Malik Murphy upright against Florida State's pass rush, a defense that frankly has been underwhelming to this point in the season. I just think that Duke is just the better team in this one. And the fact we're getting this line is because it's Duke versus Florida State.
I disagree. I'm not picking against you. I think Duke sucks. I think Duke is terrible. Where's their good win?
Is Florida State. Where's Florida State's good win?
Yeah, but you need Duke to win with margin here. Low total, 42.5. Like FSU. I think FSU showed something against Clemson because I bet Clemson in that game. I think Brock Glenn is like an answer. It's not the answer. It's an answer for the FSU offense. I think, I don't know. I don't like Duke to run it on Florida State. Because, like, with total 42.5, like, you need Duke to really kind of, like, take it to them. I don't know.
I legitimately,
Don't
I
worry.
see this
My
game.
pick is embarrassing. So I'm I'm not touting like I got some like surefire winner here.
I think like I legitimately see this game being like Duke 17, Florida State 13, and getting me home with that because I don't think either of these teams scores. Like that's not the game plan that I envision for this.
Yeah.
But I think I really come down to yes, Clemson, like Florida State did look better against Clemson than I expected them to with Brock Lynn. But I also think that Clemson knew that they could sleepwalk through that one a little bit. Like they didn't like that offense wasn't what we've seen them be since the Georgia game, basically. Like I think they very much mailed that one in because they weren't terribly worried. Duke can't afford that. Duke is not talented enough to afford that. But I do think this defense is well coached. I do think this defense does have some talent in it. And Malik Murphy, I don't think he's a world beater in himself, but I do think he is a competent, relatively experienced quarterback. And I don't think I said competent. That's not like high. He's probably.
Is he?
Okay, he might be a Jag, but hey, I don't know if Brock Glenn is a Jag either, and I trust the Duke defense more than I do the Florida State defense. How about that?
Okay, that's fair. I'll give you that. Mine, you might be giving it right back to me. I took Oklahoma State plus the 9.5 on Friday night against BYU. Okay, so the case in backing these sad sack of losers that are Oklahoma State is what was this line 3 weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma State favored for sure, right? Like at worst
Probably,
a pick.
yeah.
Okay, so let's just go through BYU's results. First of all, they've covered every game this season. So I do think the rubber meets the road at a point where you can't, there's no printing machines. Like these teams are going to not cover. And I think that you're getting almost like an artificial bump on Oklahoma State where like BYU should be laying 6.5, 7 instead of 9.5, 10. So going through BYU's last 3 games, they outgained Arizona by a grand total of 9 yards. Yet they won the game 41-19 in that one, mainly because they won the turnover battle 4-1. So, they're getting some good bounces there. You go back to Baylor, BYU. BYU was an underdog in that game, outgained by 20 yards and still win the game. Kansas State game, crazy turnovers. They had a 98-yard punt return for a touchdown. They blow them out. They were outgained by over 150 yards in that game. It's just, if Oklahoma State plays a clean game and these two line it up, I think these two teams are pretty close to equal. You got Oklahoma State off a bye. If you remember last year, Oklahoma State off their bye, turned their entire season around. No, I don't think Oklahoma State's going to turn their season around, but I do think you can get a renewed effort. And I also think that if Oklahoma State plays like they have and it's bad, they could still cover this number.
I'm gonna
give it back to me. Give it back to me.
So I can't fully give it back to you because I do not trust this BYU team fully either.
It's a big number. It's a big
number. For me, where I'm gonna push back is why in God's name are you betting on this game? Because this is the biggest stay away I've ever seen in my entire life, especially with Mike Gundy.
I think Oklahoma State might win.
Okay, well, I can't get there with you, especially with Mike Gundy coming off a cattle-related injury. I don't know if you saw that.
It knocked some sense into him.
That first off, he should have had sense knocked into him a long time ago. It's Mike Gundy we're talking about. This is just an ugly game. It's a stay-away game. I don't trust BYU, but I don't know at what point you can trust Oklahoma State. Like, they've been sticking with Alan Bowman. They're talking about working out all the quarterbacks. Like, if you can't beat out Alan Bowman, who we knew what he was coming into this year, how much confidence do you actually have in whatever they have on their depth chart? Like, I can't get there with this Oklahoma State team. So, like, for me, this is – like, I looked at this game and I scrolled right past it because there was no way in hell I was touching it.
Let's go Pokes. Guns up. I think they got a shot here. I think they could play bad again and still cover. Let's move now to the Saturday slate. A few more bigger games on the card. Let's start with Alabama, Tennessee. We kind of alluded to this one in the earlier segment. At least for me, less interest overall. Less interest from a betting perspective. More interest from a what's going to happen, what's the fallout of this game going to be. But Alabama, a 2.5-point road favorite. There's threes there. 3-point road favorite now. total of 56. Cody, where do you see this one?
I'm going under 56, man. And this is my attempt at trying not to overthink this game with two teams who, like you said, the biggest thing about this game is we're going to come out and like at least hopefully know more about both these teams than we do right now, because right now they both send us a lot of mixed messages. But the one thing I'm confident on each side in this matchup specifically is that the defenses, I think, are going to be the winners on the field. I think Tennessee's defense has the capability to absolutely slow down what Alabama wants to do. They've been great at stopping the run, so I think that's just going to negate Alabama, what they want to do in the run game. The Tennessee secondary, I think, has not totally proven itself as an elite unit by anything or that measure, but I think they've proven to be better than we expected early in the year. And on top of that, I think Tennessee has this talent and more specifically the speed on the edge to contain Jalen Milroe's rushing ability at least a little bit. Maybe, I mean, you're not going to contain Jalen Milroe fully. He's probably the best athlete on the field still, but I do think they can limit him what he can do there. I think that Alabama is going to have a little bit of trouble getting explosive plays. I think South Carolina gave Tennessee a bit of a blueprint on how to do that, and I think Tennessee is better suited to be able to more effectively do that. And on top of that, on the flip side of that, what we've seen from this Tennessee offense, if you're not going to be able to complete passes downfield, which I think is how you beat this Alabama secondary, which still has not impressed me to this point, Tennessee has not proven they can do that. So I think 56, despite what we've seen in these games in the third Saturday of October previously, I think that the under is my most confident play, just because I think the defenses win the day.
That's not bad. I'm really not confident in this game, so I got to go down with the ship. I took the 3 with Tennessee. I look, like, if I'm not, like, I got to be a man of my word. This is my team. This is a team, I got to bank on them figuring it out really fast. Look, I really, this is like a low confidence pick for me. My concern with taking the under is the ability for both teams to hit big, like, it's two really good offensive play callers, and it's teams that play fast. And it takes like one possession to just like throw this game out of whack, like one turnover, one big play. That's what scares me with that. With that being said, I think you make a great point about Tennessee's defensive line really putting Alabama into third and long and having to make some big plays. At the same time, I'm a little afraid of a big game calendar board drawing one up here against Josh Heupel. But I think at 3, it's a little much. It's a lot of respect to the Tide, given what we've seen from them over the last 2 weeks. And don't sleep on the fact that Tennessee's run game, while Nico hasn't looked good, Dylan Sampson in the mix for, Ashton Genty's going to win, but like power forward Doak Walker award, like Dylan Sampson has been a triple-digit rusher pretty much every game this season. He's been an absolute workhorse. Can that maybe alleviate some of the pressure for Tennessee in this one, and maybe put Nico in maybe get them ahead of the sticks and let Nico have some easier throws down the field? We'll see. This is a unique scheme, the veer and shoot, that Alabama did see it against South Florida in a way. Alex Golesh, the coach of South Florida, is Josh Heupel disciple. He was the former OC there. So while there is familiarity, if you go back and look at that game, South Florida was right there at the end. They had, was it a fourth quarter lead or second half lead, or it was one score? I do wonder if, while it could go both ways, Alabama's seen it, so they're going to be able to game plan it now. Okay, it's still a little different. Tennessee, even with a banged up pass catching group. But also what I do think that shows is in that game, Byron Brown missed a lot of deep shots in that one. If Nico is just okay, you just need a few to go your way to really get this one at home. I just think you have to take the 3.
I think I lean, if I'm picking a side, I do lean Tennessee on this one. And
at 3.
At 3. Yeah, absolutely. 2.5, it's probably a stay away from me. I don't really care for it that way. But if I can get the 3, if it moves to 3.5 for some reason, I'll take that gladly. But I do think, like, going back to something I said earlier, I still wonder, you talk about Kalen DeBoer game planning. I wonder how many bullets are left in the chamber. I wonder how much this team has left to show, or if we've already seen it in that first half against Georgia, because you look at the second half against Georgia, the offense was stagnant. The offense was not what we had seen. And I would venture to say that Tennessee is a better defensive unit than Georgia this season. Not, again, one of the things I did not expect to say coming into the year, but like Tennessee has looked at to this point. They have not allowed anyone to put up big numbers on them to this point.
You mentioned Georgia. Let's talk Georgia. Georgia, Texas. Your Longhorns, what might be becoming my dogs. Cody, where you at on this one? Texas. Can't find a soul who's betting Georgia in this one, but you got Texas laying 3.5 against the dogs. Total at 50. Let's call it 55.5, 56.
I'm riding with Texas, man. I mentioned earlier that I think there's one team that's separating themselves a little bit, and I think it is Texas. I will say something you mentioned. Everyone's going to take losses this year. Is something you said earlier in the show. That has me a little worried about this because this seems like a pretty obvious spot for Texas to take one of those losses. But digging into the numbers a little bit, Texas has the best pass blocking unit in the country according to PFF grades. Georgia has only been average in terms of pass rush grades, 63rd graded on PFF. The DBs, like I mentioned earlier, they're 56th in coverage grade according to PFF. On the flip side of that, Texas has a top 5 graded pass rush and the number 1 graded coverage unit in college football. I'm also still a Carson Beck believer, but one thing that has stood out to me about Georgia is I don't think anyone on this Georgia pass catching group has really separated themselves to be a game changer. Something we kind of saw a little bit of last year as well. They don't really have a dude who I think goes out there and, when they're in trouble, Carson Beck looks his way. It's probably Dominic Lovett, but against this Texas secondary, I think that might be slowed down a little bit. Again, I've lost faith in Mike Bobo. I think that the Kirby-Sark coaching matchup is a bit different, but in terms of offensive advantages, I'm taking Sark 100 times out of 100 over Mike Bobo. And I think that this Texas defense has proven that despite all they lost, they have been able to stifle every team that they played to this point, with the exception of maybe UL Monroe, which seems like a little bit of a blip on the radar at this point. But I do think that Georgia is probably the best offense that they played to this point, but I still don't think it matters. Okay, It definitely is. It definitely is. I'm sorry. It definitely is. It is the best offense that they played to this point. But with how dominant Texas has been, I still think that gives them the advantage in this one. And on top of that, speaking on kind of the opposite of Kalen DeBoer, maybe not having any tricks left up his sleeve, Sark might have a couple still up his sleeve to unload on Georgia and kind of catch Georgia by surprise in the same way that DeBoer did Georgia. Because you look at these Texas results, they haven't been really pushed in any of these games.
They haven't played anybody. They haven't played an offense with a pulse.
Okay, Alabama hadn't played anybody before they got to Georgia, and then they spanked them for 30 minutes. And I think Texas is a much better, much more talented team than Alabama.
I like Georgia. I
know you do.
I think this number is a little nuts. Georgia, they spotted Alabama, 28?
Mm-hmm.
And they had to leave with 2 minutes left. Mm-hmm. What that says to me is what their true level is, and that they can go down that much and still come back. And yes, they lost, but I think that it just shows that it's tough to really win with margin against this Georgia team. And you're going to give me over a field goal I still think it's the better team. I know it's on the road, but I do think that there's something to be said. There might be a little bit of a culture shock for Texas. This is their first, you go through their games. The Michigan win is not aging well at all, especially like the offensive side of the ball. The Oklahoma, that's like a glorified exhibition there. So even UTSA is much worse than you would expect. I don't know if Texas, all these like really nice metrics, is that really strength of schedule oriented? And when you dive in, you're like, oh, they like haven't really played anybody. And look, Texas to me, we're doing contender, pretender. That's a contender for sure. Mm-hmm. But I do look back to my preseason notes, and in there was, okay, where's the defensive line at? Because they lose Sweat, the All-American, and Byron Murphy, who is the third defensive player in the draft, first round pick. The secondary, they made some changes there because that was the weak point last year. They brought in some transfers. Hasn't been tested by a passing game yet. I think that you look at how bad Georgia started. Isn't like the whole week up to it going to be let's not spot them 28 this time. Let's get fair.
Very fair.
So to me, I'm getting what I still believe is the better team at over a field goal. I got to go with Georgia. And I also have to make up ground on you. So I had to, when I saw you take Texas, I was like, all right, I'm definitely going Georgia. But I will make the case. I think over is a good look in this game because I think both offenses are going to struggle to run the ball at a high level. So I think that this is going to be on Beck and Ewers throwing the ball 40 plus times. And if that's going to be the case, I think there's going to be explosives everywhere. So I think you could see it might be a different path to get there, but I think you see both teams get over the total, and the score line ends up looking similar to Alabama, Georgia, where it's like 31-28, 34-30, something like that. Like I think both teams are going to have to pass. And if that's going to be the case, I favor both offenses winning out. Unless I guess the SEC officials let them play tackle football, like tackle their wide receiver on the outside. But I lean towards over in this game, but I just think it's too many points to give to Georgia.
I will say I do not like the line. Like I wish I was getting a even 3.
2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, Georgia was favored in this game. Like, what's changed?
I mean, Georgia has not looked that good. Like
who's Texas played though?
But they haven't looked bad.
Okay, next Tuesday we talk. It's like, man, like maybe that Texas defense just wasn't as strong as it looked when it played like all those miserable offenses. Like, oh, what do you know? Like, what a concept. I mean, like, I feel like all these are just like we're learning that these teams aren't as good just time after time after time. The same thing happened to Georgia 3 weeks ago, whenever that was.
No, and I am not necessarily, I speak with confidence because I'm a confident guy, but like I'm not saying that like I don't see a world where Georgia wins this game.
Of course.
Yeah, like that's not how I'm approaching this at all. But I mean, like, it's not the Alabama game that I can't get out of my head when it comes to Georgia. And maybe these are look-ahead spots, but I'm looking at last week against Mississippi State when they gave up 31 to a Mississippi State team that looks pretty damn lifeless, in my opinion. And now you have to go up against Sark, who I think is probably the best offensive play caller in college football. And you look at the Kentucky game where Kentucky held them to 13 points and probably should have won that game if Mark Stoops wasn't a coward. Like, I think that Georgia has more concerning results than the Alabama loss to me to make me wonder. And again, I have a lot of faith in this Georgia roster. I have a lot of faith in the talent on this team. I worry that we're at a coaching deficiency right now. Like, are we sure Glenn Schumann is the next big thing as a defensive coordinator? Because I think he's good, but I don't know if he's great. And I don't think Mike Bobo is good even.
Georgia's schedule is kind of aging pretty nicely if you look at it. I know Kentucky lost to Vandy, but Vandy's ranked now.
Vandy's good.
Kentucky's defense, definitely top half of the SEC.
Yeah, well, but
and
so is Texas.
Clemson, everyone loves Clemson now.
I'm not trying to discredit Georgia in this one. I'm just saying that if you're going to talk to me about Texas, who has Texas played?
Yeah.
Like, they played.
I think it's a severe strength of schedule difference. I think.
But I mean, okay, do you let me ask you this, because I know we don't have faith in Michigan's offense. Do you still think that's a good Michigan defense?
Yeah.
They put up 31.
I think it's different when a team can't move the ball like at all.
I mean, that's definitely fair. We saw that last week in Red River when Oklahoma couldn't do anything.
You could handle that game different. Like same thing with Oklahoma. Like when the offense is like a complete zero, and I guess you can make the same point about Kentucky. But like when the offense is a complete zero, it just changes the game so much. Like you don't have to be worried about them going shot for shot.
All right, let me ask you one more question because I had this in my notes and I haven't mentioned it yet.
All right, let's hear it.
What big game has Carson Beck won to hit this point in his career?
It's a totally fair point. Totally.
And what big game has Quinn Ewers won to this point?
He's starting to rack them up.
Exactly. So that to me gave me a little bit more of a confidence and edge there.
That's fair. I would say biggest game Carson Beck's won. Ole Miss last year when they spanked them. Probably that, right?
That's what I was thinking. That was the first one that came to mind for me.
Who'd they play to start last year? I can't remember now off the top of my head.
Last year? Georgia 2023 schedule.
They always have like a good opening game, I feel like.
Yeah, they definitely do. Let's see. To start 2023, No, last year they played UT Martin in week 1. It was the year before that when they played Oregon, I think, and beat the absolute breaks off.
Yeah, that was Stetson though. Okay, I think that is a totally fair point. So I'm excited for Tuesday's show where we could hash out who was on the right side of it and do some victory lapping.
I'm just excited for the game, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be a great game.
Nebraska, Indiana, two surprising teams in the Big Ten. Indiana undefeated, Nebraska one-loss team, both on the upswing for sure, both out of a bye week. Indiana laying 6.5, total 50.5. Cody, what are your thoughts on this one?
Give me Coach Sig and the Hoosiers minus 6.5. Look, I know you're probably going to look at me again, and just like you did in talking about Georgia, Texas, and say, who was Indiana beating?
Dude, I'm Mr. Indiana. Are you kidding me? This is like my team. I love this team. I hope
okay. So, but I do think that there's a lot of things that stand out to me. For starters, I think that even if Indiana might be slowed against probably the best defense that they played when they're on offense, I think that this Indiana coaching staff has proven that they have these guys gelling, and also it's a very experienced group, and I think that's why they're able to gel so quickly and so well. Curtis Rourke has a lot of starts under his belt from his time at Ohio, and now he looks like he's healthy from the ACL injury, and he looks like a damn good quarterback once again. You have you have Ellison and Lawton in the backfield, who are both two experienced players. Granted, probably Ellison was at Wake, but Wake is Wake. So, but a little bit of a lower level, but they are able to be a nice two-headed monster out of the backfield. More importantly, though, I think Indiana's defense is very well designed to cause Raiola and the Cornhuskers a few problems on offense. Indiana has the 7th best pass rush grade this season in the country, whereas the Nebraska offensive line quietly outside of the top 70 in pass blocking grade. And we've seen Raiola, for all of his talent, he has looked like a young quarterback, and I think the most he's looked like a young quarterback is when he's under pressure. I think Indiana's able to get some pressure on here, but the big kicker for me, do you happen to know where Nebraska ranks in special teams grade this year according to PFF?
Oh, 100. I looked at it the other night. 130th.
133rd. They are the second worst special teams graded team in the country. Indiana is top 30 in special teams grade. When you have a game that I think is going to be relatively low scoring, I think things like field position, things like special teams and mistakes, I think that's where this margin is going to come from. So give me Indiana by a touchdown.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the game similar. My only concern with Indiana, and like it's worth noting, and I'm not even saying I'm betting against them, but this will be the best team they've faced all season. So I do think it's a pretty big number to say they're going to blow a team out with a team that is competent and has like solid trench play. So I went for the under 50.5. Mm-hmm. The big thing for me is I don't know how much Nebraska is going to move the ball. A lot of hype around Dylan Raiola. What I'm most impressed with Raiola has been his decision-making, like playing clean games. But this Nebraska team lacks a big play element to it. They are outside the top 90, in explosive pass rate. And I just wonder, with a bad running game that's averaging less than 4 yards a carry, I think it's going to be a lot of third and mediums for Raiola. And I just don't know if the big play is going to be there to flip the field or anything like that. You mentioned the special teams errors. I just think this game's a little bit more of a grind because I think this Indiana offense looks filthy. But then you go back through, it's like, okay, but like who'd they play really? Like looking back at it, they've been able to run it up on some bad teams. So I think that maybe they're a little bloated in terms of their offensive efficiency. But I do think the defense is damn good. And for Nebraska, I don't think this team wants to get into a shootout, nor are they really capable to. So like to me, higher 20s for Indiana, lower 20s for Nebraska, something like that. Like could definitely see an outcome with this like 27-20, something like that, 27-17. I just think like to me, just a lofty number for me where I think I make it like 48.5. So I took the under here, but I definitely don't hate your Indiana look. It's definitely a bigger number. This is definitely one where it's like, you gotta really take it to them.
No, one thing I would be interested in doing is maybe going like alt line Indiana minus 2.5, same game parlayed with the under, because I also like the under as well. Like I'm a big fan of the under, but I like the margin is the only thing that scares me. I think Indiana is the better football team, and I think they're actually a bad matchup for Nebraska because let's be frank about it. Nebraska doesn't have like the toughest schedule that they've had to like of teams in the country at this point. Like, yes, the Illinois game was a tough one. The Colorado matchup does look a little bit more impressive the more we see from Colorado. But I do think this is probably the best defense that they played to this point in the season. So what Raiola looks like in that situation, and you mentioned the decision making. Yes, in terms of like playing a clean game, it's been good. There have been times where I think he's tried to make a little too much happen and not necessarily throwing a pick, but taking bad sacks. And with this Indiana pass rush, I think it could put them in some negative field position there.
Yeah, and the one thing going in your direction, Sig likes to punch them in late. So you can like if they're up 3, they might put one over there.
Would love to see it
at home. All right, upset sickos. Last week, I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we've hit an upset pick every week. Did you and Josh hit one last week?
I missed mine. I had Colorado. You mentioned the Colorado-Kansas State game. I had Colorado to pull off the upset there, so that one hurts.
I also had Colorado, so I would have agreed with your pick.
And Josh also had a heartbreaker. He had UCLA at home against Minnesota.
Also would have been. So I had both. So well aware of those losses. So it's now on us to get it back here. So where are you going with your upset pick?
I'm going to Houston to upset Kansas this week. It is not a coincidence that Houston moved away from Donovan Smith at quarterback to Zeon Christ, the UL transfer, and won at TCU with their highest graded offensive performance of the season. TCU's defense is not very good. We know that. We're well aware of that. But Kansas's defense, also not very good. They're 107th in defensive success rate this season. And Houston's defense, despite their 2-4 record, has actually been kind of their calling card to this point since Willie Fritz took over. 23rd in defensive success rate this season. I think Chris, as a dual threat, is really able to put Kansas's defense on their heels. And then even no matter who's at quarterback for Kansas, I think this offense is really a product of the loss of Andy Kotelnicki and some of the playmakers they had on the outside last year. I just don't see it with this Kansas offense, particularly against the defense that is as underrated as Houston. Frankly, I think Houston should be favored in this game, but if you're going to give me plus 195 on the money line, I will gladly take that value.
It definitely could be like the better team is the underdog here. Where is this game being played? Is it Arrowhead or the soccer stadium?
Who could possibly say? But at 1-5, like, what home field advantage are we talking about for Kansas?
No, 100%.
We've seen Kansas football crowds.
I'm just giving supporting evidence. I'm just helping the cause. I completely agree with you. I think this is a great.
This is at Arrowhead. Yeah, that's going to be an empty Arrowhead Stadium.
Yeah, I think Houston for sure. Kansas, I think there's enough here where Kansas just like the much is just two teams trending in different directions. So give me Houston. I agree with you on that. For mine, you could hear the sirens going because I'm fading the Service Academy wagon that is Army. So I'm going to take ECU 5-1 to beat Army. The best team Army has faced this season could be debated because it's a bunch of really bad teams. I'll go with FAU. Now, look, ECU is far from a world beater, but they had a bye. We'll see if they figure out their quarterback situation because Jake Garcia can't stop throwing interceptions. They benched him in their loss to Charlotte. What I do like about this team, though, is they run a very fast, up-tempo offense that I think could be a bit of a culture shock for Army. I think ECU could potentially get ahead here. If there is something that they do well on the defense side of the ball, it is stop the run. I know the triple option is more unique than that, but if you go through East Carolina's defensive metrics, their best strength is against the run. They rank 5th in defensive line yards, 3rd in tackles for loss, 16th in EPA per rush. They also have a very havoc-driven defense. They've forced 12 turnovers this season. That's tied for 12th most in the country. I know everybody loves Army. Army's covered every number under the sun. Big number. Big number for a team that's beat up on a bunch of bad teams. Give me ECU. 5-1.
It's bold. I like it. I do like it a lot because
I want some more credit though. If this one comes home, I want some sort of boost in the standings or something. I get some sort of reward for you. There has to be like a threshold for underdog bets. Like if you get one big one, like a huge one.
A proposition for you, since you have picked one fewer game than I have on the season. If this hits, it's 2 wins.
Okay, but like no risk. Like I get a free win here. Like a free
it's 1 loss, 2 wins.
Okay, I'll take it. I love this. This is they're gonna win. So
so the one of the things you mentioned why I actually really do like this pick is the pace that ECU plays at, and like yes, they've been very turnover prone with Jake Garcia, and whoever's been at quarterback for them, it's been a little bit of a turnover fest. But if they're able to hit some explosives early in this game, Army being a triple option team, that is the worst game script possible for them because Army's explosives, particularly against this ECU defense, are going to be harder to come by. So, like, it could put them in a really negative game script. And, like, even if they're only down 14-0, it's not even like a huge margin. That's a lot bigger for an Army team than it would be for a lot of other teams.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a number really fast, but it's going to take too long. But, no, I mean, this is the best offense they've faced, at least in terms of ceiling. Like, has Army trailed at all this season? Like, what if they fall behind 14-0? This offense isn't built to do that. This is typically the time you want to fade service academies as double-digit favorites. I'll lean to the variance. I got 2 games up for grabs here. So, yeah, let's see what happens. Sickos pick before we get out of here, Cody. Where are you going?
Yeah, I'm not sure how sick this is. I think it's pretty sick. Vanderbilt team total over 42.5 against Ball State. Don't know anyone that's going to have eyes on this game, but I certainly will with this play. I could have played the spread because I think Vanderbilt being favored by less than 4 touchdowns is actually probably a little egregious because Ball State's terrible. Ball State's defense is legitimately probably the worst in the country. They are 134th in EPA per dropback and 132nd in EPA per rush. I don't see anyone being worse than that because that's just atrocious. Meanwhile, Vandy, 5th in EPA per dropback this season. Top 55 in EPA per rush, even though their running game is the weak part of this offense. Mm-hmm. I think Vandy, despite the fact that they're coming off of 2 big wins, I don't think the offense is going to slow down. I think the reason I'm staying away from the spread and going with the Vanderbilt team total on this one is because I think they're able to score. I think the defense maybe lets rest some guys, lets their foot off the gas a little bit. I don't think Diego Pavia has that built into him at all. I think this offense is going to keep moving. And so I think Vanderbilt hangs a big number on Ball State.
Did you see the end game between Ball State and Kent State?
I did. Oh my God.
I saw it on Bad Beats with SVP. That was like, oh my God. If I was on the wrong side of that one, that is like go for a walk. Like just take the rest of the day off.
Yeah, no, I might be taking another vacation if that happened to me, honestly.
For me, it's just the grossest bet I made all week. I took the under 55 in Florida Atlantic UTSA. Both defenses better than both offenses. Both offenses are really bad. I don't really see where you're getting much here. The best part about UTSA's defense is their rush D. They actually grade out really, really nicely on the defense side of the ball. This defense is top. Where are we at here? I got to get over the defense tab. UTSA ranks number 1 in defensive line yards, 5th in EPA per rush, and 6th in yards per carry allowed. The only thing FAU can do is run. They have zero semblance of a passing game. They are currently outside the top 125 in explosive pass rate. They want to run the ball. I just don't see it being possible here. I think that this game is just, there's not that many scoring opportunities here, and it stays under the total. Like this, I'm way under this, so I don't know. Like, couldn't tell you. I just think it's going to be a gross game, and the game goes under. I don't plan on watching a second. I plan on checking the score and hoping that neither team cracks 20.
This is the score bug special for sure. Like you're just keeping refreshing the ESPN app and seeing what's happening. No, I'm with you on this. Like, at what point has either of these offenses shown you that they can get into the 50s? Like, I don't see it at all.
FAU, the only game against FBS opponent that they've scored more than 20 points was against FIU. And in that game, they won the turnover battle by 5. And they had like a below average yards per play output. So it wasn't like they were really cooking or anything on offense. It was more like they had the ball so many more times they were able to score. So I think this game is an under special here. Cody, we went over an hour. I think the first time this year we've been good at being concise here, but I think this episode brought the best in us as we go head to head on some of these games. So why don't you recap our picks and we'll get out of here.
All right. So weeknight, I've got Duke -3.5 hosting Florida State. I've got under 56 in Alabama versus Tennessee. I've got Texas -3.5 against Georgia. I've got Indiana -6.5 against Nebraska. I've got Houston upsetting Kansas in Arrowhead Stadium, a very empty Arrowhead Stadium at that. And then I have Vanderbilt team total over 42.5 against Ball State.
And for me, on the weeknight slate, I took Oklahoma State plus 9.5 against BYU, Tennessee plus 3 against Alabama, Georgia plus 3.5 against Texas, the under 50.5 in Nebraska, Indiana, ECU on the money line for 2 winners against Army plus 500, and then the FAU UTSA under 55. Cody, excellent show as always. We hit a lot of topics, a lot of games. Great stuff as always. Great to be back in the saddle with you. We will be back same time next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, to recap a big week 8. One of us will be celebrating a Georgia win or a Texas win, and we'll preview week 9. Make sure to sign up for Underdog Fantasy using the promo code Stack in the Box. Until then, enjoy the games, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
We'll see you.